After Halloween, the trucks came at first light. Marlene Ott was out mending a gate in the cold when the first one backed up to her fence line, its brake lights glowing red in the mist, and slowly lifted its bed. A slow orange avalanche poured out, whole pumpkins, hundreds of them, then thousands, tumbling and bouncing into the frostbitten grass along her road. 2 more trucks idled behind it, waiting their turn. The drivers did not so much as glance toward the house. By the time they pulled away, a mountain of unsold pumpkins sat heaped at the edge of her field, dumped there as plain trash because nobody wanted to pay to haul it off. The whole county heard about it inside a day. They laughed. They gave the pile a name, Ott's Orange Dump, and repeated it at the feed store and the diner until it stuck to her like a burr. Everyone agreed the woman out on the county road had finally been handed the one thing that matched her failing little farm: a heap of garbage. What not a single one of them guessed, standing around laughing that cold week, was that the rotting orange mountain was about to become the best thing that had ever happened to her. Marlene Ott was a broad-shouldered woman in a faded canvas work jacket, sandy hair pinned back under a gray wool cap. She farmed 40 acres at the low end of the valley, the last worked piece of what her family had once run, and lately it had shrunk to almost nothing. A bad year had thinned her herd down to a few hogs and a flock of hens. The bank had come around twice, with soft voices and hard paper. Folks in town had quietly written her off, the woman out on the county road who could not make the place pay, who ought to just sell and be done with it. She had grown used to the pitying nods at the feed store, the way conversations trailed off when she walked in. Most mornings she was up before the sun, walking her fences in the golden mist that pooled in the low ground, counting what little she had left and doing the math that never once came out right. She had no clever plan for saving the farm, she had no partner to lean on, and no cushion to fall back on. What she had was a hard streak of stubbornness and a single habit her mother had drilled into her at that kitchen counter a long time back: you do not throw away what can still be used. You look at a thing twice before you call it worthless. It had sounded like poverty talk to her once. It was about to become the only thing that mattered. The pumpkins came the week after Halloween, and they came because of a man named Hollis Pruitt. He ran a produce outfit 2 towns over, and that fall he had guessed the market wrong. A warehouse full of unsold pumpkins, plus 3 patches that had overplanted and could not move their extras. None of them wanted to pay the tipping fee at the landfill. Hollis Pruitt was a heavy-set man in a sharp-pressed produce company polo, a clipboard always under one arm. He had looked at a plat map, spotted Marlene's empty field sitting quiet on the cheap end of the county road, and decided her fence line was as good a place as any to make his problem vanish. He did not call. He did not ask. The trucks simply rolled in at dawn and emptied their beds, load after load of whole orange pumpkins, the good ones tumbling together with the split until the heap stood taller than a man and ran a full 40 feet along her fence. When Marlene walked out into the cold and asked him just what he thought he was doing, Hollis Pruitt leaned out his truck window, looked over her ramshackle place, and grinned. "Consider it a gift," he told her. "Free fertilizer." Then he laughed, put it in gear, and drove off down the road, and the laughter, as it turned out, traveled a good deal faster than his trucks ever had. For a solid week the pile just sat there and rotted. The frost came down hard each night and glazed the pumpkins over in silver, and each morning the low sun lit the whole mound so it glowed a deep burning orange through the ground mist, honestly beautiful if you did not happen to know it was somebody's garbage. People slowed their cars on the county road to point and stare. Somebody snapped a photo and put it online with the caption that named her for good: Ott's Orange Dump. Down at the feed store, they asked her with straight faces how the big pumpkin operation was coming along, then turned away grinning before she could answer. A truck slowed at her gate one dusk, and a voice hollered out that she ought to carve the whole lot and charge admission, and the cab was full of laughter before it had even finished passing. The rot set in fastest where the split ones lay crushed at the bottom, and the smell of it drifted all the way up to the house, sweet and sour at the same time. And the crows came in by the hundreds to work the heap. Marlene finally called the county about hauling the whole mess away and learned it would cost her more money than she had left to her name. She stood at the fence in the raw cold, looking at that ridiculous orange mountain steaming faintly in the first sun, and felt the full weight of being the county joke settle down onto her shoulders like a wet coat. And then she did the one thing her mother had taught her to do. She quit seeing trash. She started, slowly, to look. She pulled a single-sound pumpkin off the top of the pile, carried it up to the kitchen, and split it open on the counter. Inside it was flawless, deep orange, dense, heavy with clean flesh and a slick tangle of seeds. And standing there she remembered her mother at this very counter, turning ordinary garden pumpkins into smooth puree that lasted the whole winter through, roasting the seeds in a cast iron pan with a little salt until they snapped between your teeth. She remembered the pantry wall lined with jars that had carried the family across more than one lean stretch. There was nothing at all wrong with this pumpkin, and there was nothing wrong with most of that mountain out there. Only the crushed splits at the bottom had truly gone over, and those the hogs would happily take off her hands. That evening she halved and seeded a dozen of the firmest, laid them cut side down across every sheet pan she owned, and roasted them low and slow until the whole kitchen filled up with a rich, sweet smell that had nothing whatsoever to do with rot. She scooped the softened flesh out of the skins, ran it smooth, and cooked it down slow over a low flame. She tasted it off the wooden spoon, and it was good, better than good. A little past midnight she had her first small batch of thick, deep orange puree cooling in a bowl on the stovetop. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she was not sitting up doing the grim math of everything she was losing. She was doing the math of what, against all sense, she suddenly had. Morning by cold morning, she worked the thing into a system. She learned to sort the whole mountain quickly by feel, the firm keepers rolled to one side, the soft splits shoved to another, the few truly moldy ones tossed to the compost. She learned that a pumpkin nipped by frost on the outside, but still hard at the core, roasted up just fine. Her nearest neighbor, an old man named Wendell Cobb, came shuffling down the lane one afternoon to see what all the fuss on the county road was about. Wendell Cobb was a stooped old man in bib overalls and cracked rubber boots, and he had canned just about everything that grew for the better part of 60 years. He looked a long while at the pile, then at her stacked pans and cooling bowls, and told her flat out that nothing was ever trash till you quit looking at it. He hauled down his own heavy pressure canner and lent it to her. He showed her how to process the puree properly so it would keep on a shelf, how to fill the jars to the right line, wipe every rim clean, set the lids, and read the gauge so nothing would ever spoil or turn. He showed her how the seeds, washed and dried and roasted, went crisp and light and sold quicker than anything else she could make. And he told her exactly what to do with the split ones the animals could eat. By the end of that first hard week, her kitchen had turned into a small factory, and the orange mountain out at the fence had quit looking like a joke and started plainly to look like inventory. It did not all go smoothly, whatever the neighbors would later assume. One long night she let a big pot run too hot and scorched the entire batch black at the bottom, and the burnt reek hung in the house for 2 full days, and a week's worth of good roasted flesh went straight out to the hogs. Worse trouble came right behind it. She ran a full canner load of puree, better than 20 jars of slow, careful work, and the lids simply would not take. One after another through the night they ticked and popped back up, every one of them unsealed, unsafe, ruined. She sat alone at the kitchen table in the dark with a whole row of failed jars in front of her and thought, seriously and for a long while, about calling the county after all, about letting them haul the rest of the pile off and letting the whole county keep its last good laugh. That was the exact morning Hollis Pruitt's truck came rolling back up her lane. She braced herself, jaw tight, for a fresh round of mockery. But he was not grinning this time, not even a little. A regional grocer had come to him wanting small batch, single-farm pumpkin puree for the holidays, real local stock, the kind customers were suddenly asking for by name, and Hollis Pruitt had absolutely nothing to sell them. He had nothing because he had taken his entire unsold crop and thrown it against her fence as garbage. He had driven all the way out, hat practically in hand, to ask her, stiff and quiet, whether she happened to have any product he could buy. Marlene looked at him across the cold yard for a good long moment. Then she told him plainly that the pile was not his anymore. It was hers now, and it most certainly was not for sale by the truckload. After that morning, she stopped apologizing for the mountain to anyone. She built 3 separate lines straight out of it. The best flesh became her canned puree, cooked down thick and sealed in clean, clear jars, a deep orange that caught the light on the pantry shelf. The seeds became a roasted snack, washed and dried and crisped up with salt in Wendell's old cast iron, then bagged by the handful. And the splits and the softs, the very part that every farm for miles counted as pure dead waste, became livestock feed. She chopped them into the troughs, and her hogs and her hens went after them like it was a holiday dinner. Her animals were fattening, free, on the exact same garbage that other outfits were paying good money to haul away. She weighed out nothing and threw away nothing. Even the stringy pulp and the scraped rinds went into the troughs, so the one pile at the fence fed 3 separate ledgers at once. She got the canning right, too, in the end. She quit rushing the heat, held her temperatures dead steady, and trained her ear to catch the clean little tick of a lid that had truly, properly sealed. Batch after batch after batch began coming out right. The failed jars grew rare, then rarer. Long rows of finished puree filled the pantry where the lean year emptiness had sat for so long. And out at the fence, the orange mountain shrank down a little more every single day, not carted off as trash this time, but carried in by her own 2 hands, jar by jar and trough by trough, and turned into the fall inventory of a farm that the whole county had already written clean off. She loaded a folding table into the truck and took it to the farmer's market on a cold, bright Saturday. And she set out her jars of puree, her bags of roasted seeds, and a plain hand-lettered card that told the honest truth about where every bit of it had come from. The first hour was dead slow. Folks who already knew the story smirked and steered wide around the woman from Ott's orange dump. Then one old-timer stopped and tasted the puree off a spoon, and somebody at the next stall bought 2 bags of the seeds, and a baker circled back around and cleared out half her table on the spot for holiday pies. An older woman bought a whole case and told her, plainly, that it tasted like the puree nobody bothered to can anymore. Word started moving down the market the same fast way the laughter had once moved through the county. Only this time it was running in her favor. By noon, she was very nearly sold clean out. People who had slowed their cars a few weeks back just to gawk at a rotting heap were now standing in front of her folding table, paying good, honest money for what that very same heap had quietly become. She drove home that afternoon with an empty cooler rattling in the truck bed and an old coffee can heavy with cash on the seat beside her, and she sat parked in her own gravel drive for a good long while before she could halfway believe any of it had actually happened. The very story that had made her the joke of the county slowly started working for her instead of against her. A local paper ran a little write-up set between a photo of the rotting mountain and a photo of the gleaming jars, and almost overnight the mail orders began to come in. She set a simple order book on the kitchen table and filled it out by hand as they arrived. A case of puree to this address, a dozen bags of seeds to that one, whole feed pumpkins by the pickup load to other small farms that had heard what her hogs were eating for free. Requests came in from 3 counties over, then from further out than that. She roasted and canned late into the night, every night, and old Wendell Cobb came shuffling down the lane to help her wipe rims and watch the gauge, and the two of them ran that little pantry like a proper assembly line. She raised her prices twice that fall and still could not roast fast enough to keep the shelf full. Before very long, she had to start telling people the puree was flat sold out and take down their names for next fall instead. The order book that had started out blank and hopeful filled up page after page after page, and the pile out at the fence was nearly gone now, worked all the way down to bare grass, turned entirely and completely into product, into feed, into cash and a coffee can and a backlog of orders she could hardly keep up with. By the time the hard frost came down to stay for the winter, the orange mountain at her fence was gone, not rotted into the ground, not hauled off at a loss, but sold. Every last usable bit of it. Hollis Pruitt bought from her regularly now at the price she set, the very same crop he had once backed his trucks up and dumped on her as trash. Down at the feed store, not a soul asked about Ott's orange dump anymore. They asked instead when her next batch of puree would be coming ready. The bank quit circling the place and started cautiously talking to her like a going concern. Marlene Ott, still a broad-shouldered woman in a faded canvas work jacket, sandy hair pinned back under a gray wool cap, walked her fences again in the golden morning mist, except now she was counting orders in her head instead of counting losses. Where the pile had steamed and stunk all fall, the grass came back in thick and green over the bare spot the following spring, and through the whole of it she kept one thing on the kitchen windowsill, a single jar from that very first small batch of puree, the deep orange proof of the only rule that had ever mattered, that nothing is trash until you quit looking at it. The whole county had looked at that pile and called it garbage. She had looked at the same pile and called it inventory. In the end, only one of them turned out to be right.